Mishima is a mental health themed 2D game, where the objective is to defeat a dungeon of enemies representing negative thoughts. The client included a number of requirements for this product, including a leveling system where the player levels up based on experience gained. Within the product, the player can increase their level or level up by gaining experience or XP by killing enemies. Killing an enemy rewards you with 300 XP, which increases your current XP amount. Once you reach the XP threshold of your level, you move on to the next level with a higher threshold. This is done in the player stats class, where we begin by creating an array with all of the XP thresholds of the 100 levels, each one 300 XP higher than the last, starting at 1000. The leveling system is contained in the add XP method, where XP level represents the amount of XP the player has. Once this amount surpasses its threshold, represented by a remaining XP of level, the level is increased, thus increasing the threshold. The client also required a wide range of supported resolutions, as the client wants the game to be playable on different devices with unique screen sizes. Within the product, the player can access the options menu from the start menu, where they can choose from a list of compatible screen sizes or toggle full screen mode. This is done in the options menu class, where we begin by creating an array with all of the compatible screen resolutions, using the Unity screen.resolutions variable. Each resolution is stored as an option string and displayed as width x height. All of this is added to the drop-down variable using the Unity add options method. When the player presses on a drop-down option, the change resolution function is called, changing the resolution size. The client also required an interactive environment with objects that the player can interact with or pick up. Within the game, players can interact with a number of objects, including dialogue objects like the scroll and NPC, and items that they can pick up and use. The dialogue neighbor class facilitates the dialogue interaction by first checking if the player is within the object's trigger box, then activating the dialogue when the player presses fire 1. The pickup class works by checking if the player is within the item's trigger box and facilitating the add item function if the player presses fire 1. The client also required an animation system for the player and enemies. Within the game, the player's forward, backward, right, and left movement is animated. This is done using Unity's animator component, where the animations are put into blend trees, where they are assigned values based on their position. This same process is repeated with the player's idle animations. Within the player controller script, the animator values move X and move Y are set to the player's rigid body position, so that the animator knows what position the player is in. Furthermore, last X and last Y are animator values used in the class to determine the player's last position, so that the player's idle animation for that position is played if the player is not currently moving. Furthermore, the enemies within the game have animated attacks and deaths. This is done by assigning an attack animation to the object's animator component, and enabling that component when the enemy attacks within the enemy AI class. When the enemy dies, the enemy object is deleted and a timed enemy death animation is played, using the Unity instantiate function in the enemy AI class. The client also required an interactive dialogue system. The game contains a flexible interactive dialogue system where players can manually progress through dialogue. This is done in the dialogue class, where we begin by creating a string array of dialogue lines, which is used to easily add new lines of dialogue within the Unity interface. The show dialogue method is called when the player starts the dialogue, enabling the dialogue UI and starting the string array from 0. If the player presses fire 1 again, the dialogue moves to the next line until the array ends. As required by the client, the game also contains an interactive menu system where players can change menus by pressing respective buttons. This is done in the game menu class, where we begin by creating an array to store our menus that are assigned in the Unity interface. Using the activate menu method, we can input a menu number using a button and search for a corresponding index from the menu array. The game menu class also handles the functionality of different buttons and menu functions, such as the display items function, which aggregates values and functions from the game manager class in order to display items in their UI item slots. The client also required a sound management system. The game contains a number of audio effects, from the menu, to the items, to the battle sounds. These are managed in the Sound Manager class, where all of the audio clips from the resources folder are assigned to audio clip containers using the Unity resources.load method. Within the play sound method, a switch case is used to handle the sounds, so that if a sound string is called, the corresponding sound is played. The client also required a health and strength system for both the player and enemies. Within the game, the player loses health when they enter the trigger box of an enemy or spike. This is done in the player stats class, where the enemy attack method reduces a player's current health by enemy damage. This method is used in the enemy AI class to trigger an enemy attack, as well as within the spike trap class. The player's maximum health is also increased on level up within the add XP function. Furthermore, the player gains health by consuming health potions using the use HP method. In terms of the strength system, the player's strength determines damage. This is done in the player attack class, where the player's damage equals strength. The player's strength is increased on level up and can be increased by consuming strength potions using the use strength method. The client also required a battle system where both the player and enemy will be able to attack each other through event handling. In the game, enemies attack the player upon entering the player's trigger box. While the enemy and player trigger boxes are overlapping, the player can also press space to attack. When the enemy's health reaches 0, the enemy object is destroyed. When the player's health reaches 0, they are prompted with the death menu where they can choose to resurrect themselves. In the player attack script, time between attacks is used so that the player cannot attack more than once at a time, by making sure that the player can only attack once every default time between attacks. The unity time.delta time variable is used to get this time. The array of enemies nearby gets all of the enemies that are within the player's range. This is done using damage range, which is a circle of set range around the player. The enemy layer is the layer attached to every enemy object, used to identify if the object within the player's damage range is an enemy. When the player attacks, the sword and blood animations are instantiated, and the health variables of enemies within the player's range are reduced by damage. Using the enemy AI script, the enemy can track the player by first defining the player's location and direction, then facing the player. The rotation speed and movement speed are defined in the Unity interface. When the player dies, the player death screen is set to active. When the enemy dies, the object is destroyed.